Welcome to the Long Take Review, where four college professors talk film, providing insight, not assigning homework. I'm your host, Jen Sobchak-Bankard, and I'm here with a robot. He tip his hat to you, but it's bolted on. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Oh, God, Jen, I got the Twinkie sweats. I'm okay, Jen. Let the record show neither of us is entirely sure we should be here talking about this film tonight, but we're going to go for it because content is better than sanity. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited to be here, too. Maybe this will be like, maybe this is a spoiler for what we're going to talk about, but maybe this will be like Megalopolis, where suddenly this is our most popular episode because it's a movie we didn't say nice things about. Anyway, at the risk of spoiling it, I should just say these were all references to the film we are here to review today, Electric State, which is now streaming on Netflix. Directed by the Russo brothers of Avengers fame, Electric State is a dystopian sci-fi adventure starring Millie Bobby Brown from Stranger Things and Chris Pratt from many things, but let's just say Guardians of the Galaxy. That's my favorite thing that he's in. As a disenfranchised teenager and a war veteran turned scavenger who venture out into the Exclusion Zone, where all robots have been banished. That was a tricky one to write, I'm going to be honest. We'll get into it. But Greg, if listeners don't want to wear Neurocasters only broadcasting our show after listening to this episode, what can they do?
Jen, I am so glad you asked because this is my third in a row. Take that, PT. You don't get this job anymore. If you are afraid of being in your own dystopian future where you miss future episodes, please follow The Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. We host the feed on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com, where you can also find Jen's excellent reviews, including her coverage of the new season of Daredevil. But you can also find the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. Wherever you listen to podcasts, dear listeners, you could subscribe to us, maybe throw us a comment. And if you really want to engage with us and potentially lobby your way onto the show, as we've now set a precedent for gleefully, then you can follow us on Instagram at The Long Take Review and on Letterboxd at LTR Pod. Can I fill a little more so I don't have to talk about this movie? No? All right. Back to you, Jen.
I was going to give a shout out to Hasib. Check out our review of Mickey 17, in which he makes his debut on the show. It is excellent.
Absolutely.
But yeah, no, Greg, I'm making us talk about this movie, even though it seems like no one likes it. But let's start just for the formality. Let's start with our short takes. What was your general reaction to Electric State?
Jen, I'm so glad you asked. So, longtime listeners know I am doing a quixotic thing with Letterboxd where I try to keep up with the most popular this week list. So if I have no plans for what movie I'm going to watch, I pull up that list. I look at what's the highest movie I have not seen, and I try to fill that in, and I see how far down the list I could get. This was my first exposure to the Electric State. I did not know what it was. I did not know it was coming from. And that is, generally speaking, kind of how I discover Netflix originals. I don't pay attention to their coming soon emails. I just see a new tile, and every Netflix movie always makes its way to the top of that list. So it just happened. So that was my first exposure. So I thought, oh, okay, let's check this out. Saw a little bit about who was in it, who was behind it. It is not just the Russo brothers. It's Marcus and McFeely who wrote the more successful Avengers movies and, have good screenwriting credentials. And so I was like, yeah, this is probably going to be good. Jen, I did not like this movie. I found it, for me, it felt like the Netflix algorithm had come to life and had mixed together all the elements that Netflix data tells you are popular elements on their service. And they just spit out the most kind of superficial, thinly marked version of what this kind of movie could be. Does it lack any originality? No, it doesn't. There are some kind of clever things, and there are some set pieces, and there's some world building that I appreciated. But most of the time, I was wondering, how did they get this much money, and why would you not try to fight world poverty instead of making this movie with that money, with that budget? So I'm going to say I'm not a fan. but I will say that puts me in the minority because this was the most popular film on Netflix. I think it's in the hunt to be one of their most popular releases ever. So don't take it from this grumpy old man. Maybe it's a good movie. Jen, you said this was this generation's Citizen Kane in our texting. So is that a position you stand by?
Always trying to set me up. I appreciate it. So I also do not think this movie is very good. I think I may be, based on your comments, maybe ever so slightly higher on it, but that does not mean I liked it necessarily. I tolerated this movie more than anything else. And what's really disappointing is that on paper, the pitch for this movie does sound like exactly the type of thing I would like, and that would be my choice, my kind of comfort viewing on a Friday night, sitting on my couch watching Netflix. Like, it really did seem like it was going to be for me because it's sci-fi. It has actors that I've liked in other things. It seems like it was kind of goofy and funny, and maybe a little James Gunn energy. So I was interested, and I actually, unlike you, I had heard about this movie purely through Matt Bellany on The Town.
Mm.
Because I think because it is so expensive and it's like a big Netflix title, they spent a lot of money on it. It just kind of kept coming up sort of on episodes of that show that is very industry focused. And so I had heard about this movie, that it was like very expensive, was kind of a big deal for Netflix. And then all the reviews that I followed came out were totally trashing this movie. So I was like, I gotta see for myself. Usually bad reviews make me sort of forget about seeing it, like deprioritize and eventually forget about seeing a movie like this. But I was like, you know what? Like, I want to check it out. I'm here. My Netflix subscription is here. Let's just fire it up. How bad could this be? And I think the number one crime of this movie is just being completely soulless. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's doing these empty gestures of other movies that it's trying to aspire to be like, but at the end of the day, the scenes that it gave us that were supposed to build an emotional investment just did not pay off. And it's hard to kind of pinpoint, and hopefully in spoiler mode we can try to do this. It's hard to pinpoint why that is. It's one of those things that's more intuitive than anything else, where you're just feeling it or not feeling it. But for whatever reason, this movie really was kind of like, by the end I was like, why? Why is any
Yeah.
of this happening? Which is too bad, because I think it is making an earnest attempt to create an original sci-fi world, which, to be fair, on other episodes we have praised, right? Even
Yeah.
when it doesn't totally pan out the way that
It is a big swing. Like we always say, we want a big swing.
yes. So like, just the character design in a lot of this, it's these big kind of like atomic age style, 50 styles robots. In theory, that should have been cool, but it just so, yeah, I'm excited. I don't want to say too much more because we're not in spoiler mode, but to me, it was just kind of like checking all the boxes in theory, but in practice, didn't really move me at all and didn't kind of catch my attention. There's a couple things that I thought were funny and that were sort of charming to me, but at the end of the day, the main plot line of what's at stake here and the emotional stakes, like, just didn't really do it for me. So it's too bad. I wanted to like it, but it just didn't do it. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's right. And so we should do a quick recommendation algorithm. Uh, if I keep adding beeps as you play the actual beeps, it not only makes your editing harder, but it makes a better and better sound clip, right?
There we go.
Over time. Yeah. So, you know, again, when we totally pan a movie, it's like, who do you wish this movie on? But I'm gonna be completely honest and say I got about an hour in, and I was like, I think my 9-year-old would love this. And so I paused and I showed him the trailer, and he was like, "This looks really cool. I want to watch this." And then, has he watched that in the 3 weeks since then? He has not, but that's kind of typical. But there is something that I think, to your point about superficiality, you can't go to this as an adult wanting an adult time at the movies. But I think there is probably a demographic of kid who's probably in line somewhere right now for the Minecraft movie that this might really work for. It's like just a couple ideas that are good enough, and that's okay, right? I mean, listeners, I'm talking to you secretly now. you know those guys who like to pretend Ghostbusters is like incredibly awesome, and you're like, maybe when you were 9, this is for them. This is for this year's 9-year-olds, right? I know I'm being mean to PT. You don't have to type it into the chat. I knew that before the message appeared.
Yes, that's
Uh,
exactly what I was doing.
but I will say that was my experience of this. Like, I think I missed Ghostbusters when I was 9 or 10 or whenever it came out. I think I was much younger than that. So it never held that joy for me. I think other people experience this with Dark Crystal and Willow, or I know you were just on the Nostalgia Cast. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on Labyrinth, which is one that caught me when I was 9, but missed my wife. And so when I showed it to her as an adult, she's like, what is this garbage? Like, what are you doing to me? So I would say, if you have a kid right around that age, there's nothing here that's that offensive. It's pretty G-rated, I think, a little violence, and I think it would be a good time for that kid.
Yeah, and especially if you focus, like I said earlier, mostly on the big flashy robots.
Yeah.
You're not thinking too hard about the story, then yes, I think it does have enough to kind of hold somebody's attention if they're in it for the kind of visual spectacle or just like the sci-fi, just being in a sci-fi world, right? There's enough there for you for sure. To me, it was just hard. It was distracting thinking about how many TV shows and movies this is clearly, like you mentioned, this is the algorithm come to life, right? Like that are clearly feeding into what this is trying to be. And it almost it almost feels like if you ask Chat GPT,
Yeah.
pitch me a movie in which it's influenced by all these things, that this is what it would come up with. And so like for me, it really feels like Ready Player One mixed with a little bit of Fallout, if you've seen that, the TV series. I mean, it's a video game, but
Definitely
it's a TV
aesthetically.
series, right?
Yeah.
It does have the kind of like 50s, but make it dystopian kind of feel to it. But then also, and this is partly because of the casting, right? You have to map Stranger Things and Guardians of the Galaxy onto this a little bit, because I do think Chris Pratt and Millie Bobby Brown are basically playing Kirkland brand versions of those characters in some ways. Or that's why they're in the movie, right? Because they were successful as those archetypes. And then, so they're in slightly different versions of those here, with slightly worse wigs. And
like the wigs caught a stray like 3 episodes of Long Take Review ago, but they were so bad. But anyway, go on.
And then yeah, I'll save it for save my other wig commentary for Spoiler Road, which I usually don't have a lot. But yeah, I think what other movies do you see kind of fed into the algorithm here?
I was going to add one ingredient that I think you're missing is E.T. It's aiming for an E.T.-like relationship between Millie Bobby Brown's character and the primary robot, and actually in some ways also between Chris Pratt and his robot. But to your point, it doesn't quite get to that level of heart and connection. But I would add in a dash of that. It's not really trying to be an old school Amblin movie, other than that, but it kind of has that feel to it.
Yeah, and I wish I feel like when I was watching it, I was like every 5 minutes coming up with, oh, and there's that movie, oh, and there's that movie, and now I'm kind of drawing a blank a little bit. But I think the sort of it's that's why I said Ready Player One, is because it's not quite a simulacrum or a pastiche of 80s movies, but it is copying Ready Player One's nostalgia and pop culture references of the 80s.
Yeah,
makes sense.
Well, and it's the 90s, but exactly in that same mode, right? Like, and this, well, we're getting dangerously close to spoilers, but whereas Ready Player One put in all things so you could be like, I know that thing. This has a little of that, but it also invents a lot of its own kind of characters that we don't have in this world. So yes, as Jen's earlier reference noted, when Jen, I believe when you said this had some actors you enjoyed, you were referring to Mr. Peanut, right? You're a big Mr. Peanut fan, and you're like, let's see Mr. Peanut. So
or Woody Harrelson,
weird.
Isn't that his voice?
It is. And I will say, I did not know Mr. Peanut was going to be in this movie until the Planters branded ad happened before my copy of it played, and Planter said proudly featured in Electric State is our own Mr. Peanut. So the corporate synergy is here, but he's kind of the biggest example of that. There are a couple others, but it's mostly invented characters, which you could have been a lot more crass and cynical about. So they avoided some of those temptations here. They weren't what was the Jerry Seinfeld movie, the cereal
Frosted?
movie? Frosted. Yeah, they're not frosted.
Oh, all right. So I guess are we saying fire this up in the background on Netflix while you're doing something else? Like, that's the only other way that this movie might be somewhat interesting. But I don't know.
I'm going to be honest. I watch most Netflix originals as a part of that project. And even among the Netflix original that are all quite disposable, this is a pretty extreme example of disposable. So I could give you 10 more movies. The Life List just premiered. Connie Britton teaching a young woman how to live life. Go fire that up. Skip Electric State. But sure. Background of your background. That's fine.
I'm trying to think. I wonder if this is the first movie we have just straight up not recommended. Anyway, that probably is a sign that we need to go into spoiler mode. So if you, for whatever reason, are planning to watch Electric State, but you haven't yet, you don't want to hear us talk about it more, and don't want to hear our criticisms of it, we might say some nice things too. I shouldn't be as presumptuous.
If you absolutely loved Electric State, please also leave now, because we're not going to make you happy.
Oh, that's fair. There were some things I liked. We'll talk about it. Anyway, this is your spoiler warning. Please leave it now. Okay, so the thing that this is just to start on something completely trivial. The thing I didn't say earlier, because I'm like, maybe that's a spoiler. Ke Kwan is in this movie.
Yes, that was a surprise.
With the same wig as Chris Pratt. Like that. Sorry, that's my joke. That's my joke that I wanted to make earlier, and then I couldn't because they have the exact same haircut. It's like the weird, greasy, wavy 80s, I guess, cut. I don't know, or 90s. Now I'm confused. Now you have me confused. What's 80s and what's 90s in this movie? But
we are in the 90s because Clinton is in the before times.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So that's where I want to start. I think it's become well known at this point in Hollywood, or common wisdom, that a lot of our auteur directors are doing period pieces because they are avoiding the problem of cell phones.
Mm.
Was this totally constructed the way it was just to avoid the problem of cell phones and all of that? I mean, the way in which it constructed its reality to me was very surprising and strange. So maybe if you want to describe it to listeners who haven't seen it and just want to hear us
talk about
a movie, but what your explanation is for why they chose that specifically.
So, to be totally honest, until you said that just now, I totally forgot that this was supposed to be an alternate version of our universe, like an alternate history. That's totally dumped at the beginning and then never addressed again, essentially. Yeah. So, that, if I remember correctly, the idea is that Walt Disney, in creating the kind of Tomorrowland, innovation robots, that his animatronics went the next step, and then robots became sentient. And then now that created a whole other historical trajectory for our world, where there's a robot-human war that breaks out, and then the robots are kind of, like I said at the beginning, banished to this exclusion zone. There's a treaty where robots and humans are not supposed to mix. And then meanwhile, because that wasn't enough apparently, meanwhile, I'm not going to take credit for this. I think someone on Letterboxd called Stanley Tucci Italian Steve Jobs, which I thought was so there's a Steve Jobs-esque tech guru figure who makes basically the Matrix thing in Ready Player One, the headsets, the kind of VR headsets that people put on, and then they forget about the reality around them. And so there's this competing robotics technology that humans are using, where they can basically project themselves into a robot avatar, and those exist alongside these other robots, but they've been banned. There's a DMZ where it's
yep,
the two cannot mix, right?
Yeah, I think you've covered it all there, and you did a better job than Harrison Ford explaining the Celestial. But I think what you're alluding to is that there's just way too much premise here. Um, there was a really excellent article on AV Club where one of their critics, apologies for forgetting the name, talked about how the book that this is based on is actually kind of amazing and beautiful, and all of that life has been sucked out of it. And so I hadn't known this was a book ahead of time, and I'm actually not positive if it's a YA novel or a graphic novel. I think it might be a graphic novel, but I'm not
I'm
sure.
looking it up. Keep going.
But I would say that, like, I don't know how much of this premise comes to us from that source material, right? Like, it could be that, yeah, when I was Googling quotes for our opening, I just got all these results for cheating websites. That's like, did your teacher assign you the electric state? Use these quotes to pass your paper.
Oh,
Thank you for existing, cheating websites. I'm sure that's how many students have made it through my class. So, um, I think it's probably something closer to The Wild Robot, which is like a heavy illustrated novel, not a kind of traditional comic book graphic novel. And I'm saying that assertively as if you didn't just type that into the chat, because as a white man, I need to take credit for what you offered, right?
I
So
was gonna say that was so smooth. Why did you ruin it?
edit that part out. Edit that part out. Um, so I don't. Again, the criticisms we're offering to the movie, we might actually be offering to the book. I'm not positive on that. But I will say, I didn't understand this world's complexity and what it added to it. It felt like sizzle, not steak. And it very much felt like Ready Player One, like you noted. And but then we get like, oh, here's an abandoned mall. And we're supposed to believe that somewhere in the late 80s, they built the world's most Americana mall inside essentially the Grand Canyon. Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And I think it's kind of based in, we thought of a cool visual and let's retrofit a story to make it make sense.
Right. And the thing is, we haven't even mentioned what arguably is the central plot, which is that Millie Bobby Brown's character, Michelle, has a little brother who they establish is some kind of prodigy or genius and is going to college at the age of like 10 or whatever. And that he becomes co-opted or kidnapped and exploited by this big tech company that we referred to earlier. And that the movie, arguably its emotional core, is supposed to be about her search for her brother and then his ultimate sacrifice to save the world. But we didn't even mention any of that. We were talking about what
and we experience the relationship somewhat through a little robot that is meant to be his consciousness talking to her, and it's the robot that was the star of his favorite television show, anime show, and so the ET relationship is really a recoding of that brother sister relationship, but also with this, I'll give it credit, somewhat interesting question of, is this actually my brother's consciousness? Is this just a robot? I thought they could have done more with it, but that is kind of an interesting premise within that. And he went to college before the robot war, but then started getting exploited after the robot war. It's all very confusing.
right, but then he's also hospitalized because of a car crash. Let's not forget
Right.
that.
That killed some
And
parents?
that's how Ki Hee Kwan whisks him away to be like a lab rat, because they,
Yeah.
in doing scans of him, which apparently they didn't do before, they discover something that they don't never really say about how his brain works that makes him like a neural network for this Italian Steve Jobs, who realizes he doesn't have enough bandwidth to support the commercial scale of these neurocasters.
Yeah.
And it's so, yeah, you're right. I didn't mention this in my short take, but now that we're kind of trying to draw it out, it is super convoluted. And in a way that doesn't actually have any impact, because I think the brother sister bond, I got to find my brother, I'm going to knock every door down to find him, actually has very little to do with the world that it's trying to establish and kind of
Yeah.
what makes it a dystopian sci-fi story. So I think that's where the disconnect ultimately comes in, is that it just becomes set dressing. All the sci-fi stuff becomes set dressing for this brother sister, I got to get my brother backstory that ultimately doesn't really pay off a whole lot. Do we have an idea why that is?
I mean,
Are
I
our
think
hearts made of stone?
maybe
Greg?
that's it. Yeah, we hate our siblings. No, we don't. We love our siblings. Don't put it out there on the internet that we don't like our siblings. So I think you're right that it goes back to what you said, that it's superficial and thin, because it doesn't feel like this movie set out to tell us something about the sibling relationship. It feels like somebody said, like, "Oh crap, you're supposed to have something that makes people cry in the last half hour. Let's see if we can build that backwards and into this." And so, you have to put your character on a quest, and Millie Bobby Brown's character is on a quest, and that's kind of interesting. And then Chris Pratt becomes her helper and so on. And it kind of is the kind of most superficial version of a Campbell journey. And that all is just, it doesn't feel like they care about it. So it's hard for us to then care about it. Where I would compliment it is, again, there were some visuals that I will really remember. I liked the giant robot carrying the old burnt out VW bus with them sitting in it. Like,
Yeah,
that's
that
just
was
something
cool.
I've never seen before, and like is fun. And then when they start throwing things at the forts and stuff, like there's some cool things there, but it just doesn't feel like I cared about absolutely any characters in this film. So the resonance didn't happen the way it does in something like an Avengers movie or something like that.
The main thing I liked about this movie was Herm. And he's the closest thing I got to like caring about any of these characters. And to be very, very specific, I didn't care about Chris Pratt's character caring about him. That also felt hollow.
Yeah.
And especially since they took it back immediately, I did like the bit of like, oh, there's a smaller one on the inside. Like, that was pretty funny.
Yeah,
but
that
in
was.
terms of like, I think it was taking itself seriously as an emotion. It's trying to have it both ways, where Chris Pratt is like, you're dying and I'm going to confess my love for you. And then immediately they undermine that with, oh, he's not dead. Never mind. But then they also want to crack this joke about, oh, there was a little guy.
Yeah,
So I
don't
mean,
worry about
I
it.
I thought he was very funny. Like, I liked that he was like like, I'm always on board for a sassy droid. That's known.
Yeah. Well, just to explain to you and reveal to our listeners, when you said Herm, I just thought you said her, and I was like, "What? That's who
No.
you cared about?" And so then when you switched to the robot and you saw me laughing a lot, I was like, "Oh, of course you didn't care about the human. You cared about the robot."
No, I cared about the
Yeah.
robot with an attitude. Like, that was great.
Yeah, and there were like, another movie in the mix is Wall-E, because of all the robots, right? Like, when we get to the mall, it feels very much like getting to the Wall-E ship, and I think there's a beautician robot in both and some things like that. So
I also was getting The Last of Us, because there's a good portion of The Last of Us that takes place in a mall.
Spoiler, I haven't watched Last of Us.
Wait, what? Oh.
I watch movies, not TV. Come on. You know this about me.
Yeah, but this has Pedro Pascal, Greg.
Oh, all right.
I figured you'd make an exception for that. Anyway, that's not a spoiler.
Whatever. Okay. I don't really care. I bailed out of Last of Us when they said, it was like 20 miles outside of Boston, and it was clearly deep in the Rocky Mountains. That rang hollow for you too, right? Like, that's not what 20 miles outside of Boston looks like.
The video game, to be fair, looks great from that front, like regionally accurate. Okay. Just, I don't know, maybe production limitations, but we're getting off topic. You really want an excuse to talk about anything else other than this movie. So if we were, because we were just very generous, so listeners aren't going to realize, because I'm planning to release these two episodes a week apart, but the last week's episode, as you would have heard it, or as it would have dropped, we actually are recording on the same night. And so just a few minutes ago, about half an hour ago, Greg and I were very generously trying to say, what did we like about Captain America Brave New World? Which arguably is better than this movie. But still, we're a movie that has been critically panned. We were trying to kind of defend. We're not doing that with this movie, maybe because it doesn't have the same, hasn't earned the same points that the MCU has. And so therefore we can't be as generous with it. But I do want to try to think about, what is this movie trying to do? Like, does it have a message? Is it trying to say something? What is the
thesis, please?
What do you think, Greg?
All right. We would like to sell some robot toys. in the spirit of the question, the most generous version I can think of is this movie is interested in the question of what makes us human or what makes humans humans. And so the basic premise here is that the robots have advanced so far that they are human, and in oftentimes cases in the movie, more human than the humans, and that the humans have regressed enough that they are less human than the robots. And so shout out to Jason Alexander, who is in this movie for some reason, but he's a nasty guy. He's exploiting I think the foster relationship to get money in some way to
Yes.
care for the main character, and yet doesn't care for her. And he is one of many, he's the first of many figures you see just wasting their humanity plugged into a robot that is out there living their actual life, right? So this basic idea of even Giancarlo Esposito's character is like the top trained hunter, but he's just sitting in his living room, which does provide some pretty good visuals, right? Like to remind you. But the idea that, I think this movie wants to point out this kind of simple premise, there but for the grace of God go I, that this is where we are close to getting to if we don't kind of pull ourselves back and reclaim some of what makes us human. And in that regard, I think shout out to the creator, which you name checked last episode, that the creator didn't really care that much about AI. It just wanted to use cool robots and tell a cool robot story. No disrespect. That's a good way to spend your time. But this is actually trying to point out something about AI. And I imagine that's a conversation that you, like me, are having a lot in your classroom, because students, in their eagerness to get a good grade, are relying on generative AI technologies, and they are not realizing how much they're outsourcing their learning. So in terms of their education, they are trying to get the grades, not trying to get the education. And I think that's something that speaks right to the heart of this issue of what makes us human. And, if you have had some come to Jesus moments with students using AI, I'm sure you use the same language I do, which is like, what is the point of this? Like, sure, maybe you trick half your professors and you get a better grade, but you're not going to succeed at your job, and you're not going to have the thinking skills that are required. And I think that this movie is kind of interested in similar questions, right? And putting the relationship at the heart of that is a reminder that it is possible, right? She builds a big relationship with this robot, but it's fake. And I think, a movie like Her would actually do that a lot better. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 10 years ago,
I
probably
don't want to
closer.
think about that.
But this movie is trying to also say, like, we are at risk of giving those relationships away just as easily. And so we should be more concerned of that. So I think it pulls together the two pieces of that plot line into the question of what makes us human. And the answer is not Chris Pratt's wig. That does not seem like a human enterprise.
So, okay, I like that reading. I think that makes sense. And now you're making me think of why that the payoff of that is very hollow, because really the denouement of that idea in the film is really supposed to be in that sort of broadcast that Michelle makes to the rest of the world. Like, after they've taken down the Neurocasters, the network's down, everyone's kind of, what's going on? Waking up. She gets on camera and makes this big speech. Her speech is incredibly vague and cliche, to the point at which I wanted to be like, is this a student paper? Like, is this a freshman paper that I want to mark up and be like, can you be more specific? And I think that's part of the problem, is that it's trying to get across this pretty valid message, but the language that she's using is basically like, connect with other people, like live in the moment. Like, it could basically be embroidered onto a pillow. You know what I mean? Like, it's like carpe diem is like basically what she says. and that's like just too cliched to mean anything, right? It's I tell this to students all the time. And actually, to me, the thing I've started thinking recently is this is going to be the biggest thing that we as writing teachers, and I really wish we'd done rhetorical situation now, have to fight against, is that I think because something like ChatGPT is designed to give us the statistical average of what something says or sounds like, inevitably it can't be specific and individualized. And so I think more and more now, whether or not a student used ChatGPT to make something or wrote it themselves, I am more than ever commenting on, okay, this is very broad. Can you give us a specific example, or can you say the same idea but in a more nuanced and specific context that applies to you and is unique to you as opposed to somebody else? Like I teach a job application assignment, and we kind of were talking about, okay, is AI actually good for writing cover letters? It's better at writing cover letters than it is other types of writing. And but I was trying to say, like, but yes, but like, shouldn't we try to push past that? Shouldn't you try to make it more personal, right? And like, cover letters have always been pretty formulaic and stock. What if they weren't? Like, what if that this is going to change people's expectations for what makes a cover letter effective? Like, you have to kind of push past what ChatGPT can do. And then the really disillusioning thing and depressing thing one of my students said was, isn't AI the one who's actually reading the application anyway? So why does it matter?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm done.
Yeah. You said you handed the chalk to that student. You're like, you're the teacher now. And you just walked
like,
into the ocean.
This is your problem now.
I think that's exactly right. And it is this kind of curious place we're at, where it's like, we are at a place where us and people in our line of work want to assert that humanity still matters. And again, in a generous reading of this film, that's part of what it is like, what makes us human is supposed to still matter. And I do think that kind of predictive model of like what's most likely to be the next word feels like how this movie was constructed, as you said at the beginning of this. But I do think the film feels like where it falters in that is it just feels like the dad in the car saying, let's all put our phones down and talk to each other for a few minutes. And I don't know why I picked dad, but it feels like a dad move. But I do think that there's so many cliches. We're in this spot with technology that we all almost universally recognize that it's too much of our lives and it's ruining our attention spans. It's ruining our relationships. And yet we can't actually make the commitment to stop, right? Or to step back or to step away. And, the beauty of boredom is something that we forget about, the beauty of, making those connections. I joke about it all the time that the 10 minutes before class used to be students grumbling about me, about the assignment, about, life, about the dining hall food. And now it's all of them just flicking and tapping on Instagram posts for what they like and getting all that. And, they don't connect with each other. And like, but to the point about you made about a student paper, nobody needs that as a thesis. We all know that. We all know we should stop being on our phones, but we don't choose to do it. And so if you want to say something about this, it's got to be something that breaks through what we already know, right? I tell my students all the time, if your thesis is not debatable, if you're just telling us something everybody already believes, it doesn't work as a thesis, right? Human trafficking is bad. Yes, nobody's like, woo, human trafficking, right? Like, it's wrong, it's bad. So you have to say something about what makes that a debatable position, or you have to turn that into a debatable position. And I would challenge this movie with that. You're saying what we all already know. How do you move beyond that?
Right. And there is a way.
Conflict.
There is there is a way in which the temptation to escape into and ostrich our way into the technology because the world around us has fallen apart, that can hit dangerously close to home right now, right? For a number of reasons. Like, just pick anything, right? And it's like, like everything's terrible, right? It's the dumpster fire where you're like, everything's fine here, right? And so that feeling, I think, is one that's pretty raw and real for a lot of viewers, potentially. But at no point is the film harnessing that. It's not talking about, well, why do you want to escape into this?
Right.
Why do you want to be numb and placated? And also, like, arguably Wally said this how many years ago?
I mean, everything we just said is done better in Wall-E, really.
Yeah. Oh.
But Wall-E's fantastic.
2008. Wow. That was a long time ago.
And maybe that's the problem, is this movie feels like 2 rounds ago in the discussion. And, I don't know to blame the directors, the screenwriters, the Netflix corporation, which really doesn't want you to unplug, right? They want you to, they'll even give you the next thing right now before the credits roll so you can stay plugged in and stay escaped into it. And I think, again, to talk about being a parent in screen time, that's something it comes down to. Like, my son all the time is like, what can I do now that you made me shut off the video games? There's nothing to do. And to try to recognize that escapism happens because that heightened state we get into, it's like we can't think of that as normal. And so many of us are now there and as a part of that. Really, probably the most important issue of our age, and it's not just projected onto children, it's all of us, and yet this film is dealing with such an outdated version of it. It just has nothing to say. So, boo. Don't watch this movie.
And none of that, I think, to your point, none of that goes with what is arguably the coolest part of this movie. Earlier we shouted out the robots. Like, the robots themselves are kind of cool. Those robots have nothing to do with what we just talked about for the past 10 minutes, right? Like,
nope.
Nothing at all. So
yeah,
I guess maybe to kind of diagnose it finally is like, this movie is actually torn between being WALL-E and being something like, I don't know, what's the Robin Williams AI movie? Is it just called AI? I can't remember now. You know what I mean?
Robin
Like,
Williams.
About robots are people too. Like, that's a totally different movie.
Man? Is that what you're thinking of?
Yes, I think that's what I'm thinking. Yeah, that's terrible.
What a ball! I haven't thought about that movie in a long time.
But that is the message of that movie, right? Is like, robots can be people too.
I think so. I think
I was trying to
remember when I was 7 or 8. I think yes, that's what that was about. No, it's not quite that old. It's got to be late 90s.
It's 99 apparently.
Yeah, all right.
So you're not wrong. I don't know why my brain went there. But there's lots of movies that are like, Blade Runner also, like, if we create robots, are they going to create, like, there's a whole subgenre of sci-fi that's about like sentient robots and how we should treat them, and Isaac Asimov, right? Like, so, but that is not the same thing. That discourse is not overlapping too much with what we're talking about in terms of the need for people to escape through a virtual reality. That's a whole other thing. So,
A24 masterpiece Ex Machina. So many of the same questions, but done at the adult level, right?
Why didn't I say that? That's why did I have to go to Bicentennial Man?
This is clearly something on the minds of creators right now. Companion, that came out earlier this year, does a lot with this issue as well, and kind of these questions. And so I think it is, totally natural that they would want to pursue this. They just have done a bad job about it. Hey, I think you're right that we've mainly covered rhetorical situations. So maybe we don't have to enter into it, but I will just say, to again speak about intertextuality, here's my rhetorical situation question for you. Should we be done with the Russo brothers? Why is it that nothing they create outside of Marvel seems to work?
Right.
And I'm looking at you, Cherry. I'm looking at you, Gray Man. I'm looking at you, other things. What's going wrong here?
All right, we're definitely on the same wavelength with this. I wish you could see my screen because I just pulled up the Russo brothers filmography on Wikipedia and was about to ask you a version of this question. So it's not looking good, right? And okay, so you mentioned this on a previous episode. Producers, they've been much more successful when they're not directors. So Everything Everywhere All at Once, that's an amazing movie. It won a bunch of Oscars. We do have to acknowledge and give them credit for the part they played in that, right?
Absolutely.
But then let me just read you their filmography. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. There's a few movies that probably... Okay, never mind. I will read the whole thing. 1997 is where it starts. A movie called Pieces, I've never heard of. Welcome to Collinwood. Also haven't heard of that. You, Me, and Dupree. I vaguely remember that as being a bad comedy with Matthew McConaughey, maybe? Or no, Luke Wilson? Owen
Wilson.
Somebody with a broken nose. And Captain America Winter Soldier, great. Captain America Civil War, also great. Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, right? Nothing but heaters here. They're on a roll. 21 Bridges, I don't know what that is. Mosul, don't know what this is. Extraction, was that also a Netflix movie? But with Chris Hemsworth.
Thor.
Those last three, they were producers. Cherry, they were both producers and directors. That is, I've said on record before, that's a bad movie. Poor Tom Holland really suffered for his art for no reason. And The Gray Man, they directed Everything Everywhere All at Once. They were producers. Extraction 2, they were just producers on. And then The Electric State. And then their next thing after this is Avengers Doomsday. So really, is it that they only do good work if they're hooked up to Marvel?
So just to note, 21 Bridges is, I believe, Chadwick Boseman's last movie that was released, right? He's a policeman and is hunting down a cop killer, and they shut down all the bridges into New York City. I bet you can guess how many there are.
That's great.
Actually, a pretty good Chadwick Boseman performance, although
I haven't seen this.
In the pantheon of his performances, it doesn't rank, but it's, he's always good when he shows up. So here's my thesis. So one major credit you missed on that, not because you were reading a bad list, is they rose to prominence in my life as the directors on Community. So a lot of those episodes of the television show Community that really did genre parody, they kind of were the directors, and especially the first season, they did a lot of it. So my theory is not that they are just bad directors on their own or have to be in Marvel. I think they are good kind of working directors. Am I supposed to say workmen? Is that the sports metaphor we didn't get? Journeyman directors. I think if they are hooked up to somebody kind of genius, they can execute that person's genius pretty well, or facilitate it. In the case of the Daniels know what they want for this movie. They can come in, they can give notes. I'm sure they were active producers, not just financiers. And I think that's something they've done in Marvel. I think Feige had the vision and they could say, okay, we know how to do this and we know how to do it right. I think the problem is when they're thinking up things on their own, they just don't have that same level of genius in the writing. I mean, there were some inventive things in Cherry in terms of direction. I remember some drone shots from overhead that were kind of unique. Were they a part of that film in a meaningful way? No, but it wasn't a good movie, like you said. And The Gray Man, again, I would exactly use that same word you've been using this episode, which is hollow. It's like, oh, everything here makes sense, except there's something missing. There's no spark. And so I think that's where they struggle. And, just because who else can catch strays? This is something you hear about Gareth Edwards, which we were mentioning, the creator, and that's one of the concerns about his Jurassic Park movie coming up. It's like, it seems like he needs a really good writer, and then he can execute the visuals incredibly well. And there's no shame in it. And the Russos either, right? They're better than I am at those skills, but you don't have to be good at everything. And being that kind of prestige writer director might be the way to be the most famous, but I think it's really, really difficult to do well.
And they're in good company. I mean, Ridley Scott, I would put in this category as well.
Yeah.
When he knocks it out of the park completely if he's paired with a screenplay that he can execute on, right? Like,
yep.
And it's more when he's also involved or the screenwriter is not pulling their weight to match his epic vision or whatever, right? Then we run into trouble. And I'm not going to say more because then I'm worried I'm going to provoke Greg into making fun of me about Gladiator 2. So yeah, it's tough. I mean, it might just be that the tone of the MCU is also their thing, because that's, once you mention that they were behind Community, that is actually the kind of quippy, smart but goofy and jokey tone. I can kind of see a through line between those two, right? And
yep,
they're cut from similar cloth. They look very different in the end product, I think, but I think the sort of ethos behind it is pretty similar. So maybe that's what it is. And like when they try to do something a little bit more serious, and I do think that's part of the problem with Electric State, is that it's taking itself just a little too seriously to actually. Because it's not going to get us on an emotional front by being serious, and then its message, like we said, is not going to get us. So really, what they could have leaned into to prevent that from being a problem is to just make it like goofy and jokey, right?
Yes.
There's a version of this movie that probably has mostly the same cast and is just about the crazy robots doing crazy things. That actually could be pretty funny, like Wasteland Robots.
Yeah,
but with Chris Pratt, like. That actually doesn't sound too bad. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So when they tried to bring in all this other stuff. Yeah.
You made me remember Borderlands as also another version of this kind of done lately, which was crazy. But similar flaws, despite a really good cast in that case, right? Cate Blanchett kills it in that movie, but it's just a big nothing burger
like,
as well.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Is this just because
Yes.
Mad Max is so good, everyone's chasing that high, right? Is that maybe what the problem is? We just need to stay out of the desert.
Yeah. Maybe. And I was also going to note that I think your thesis about their tone makes sense. But remember that so much of the DNA of Community, the genius they're hooked up to there is Dan Harmon, who then creates Rick and Morty and trains all these writers in his style and his voice that then go and get hired by Marvel. So I think it is kind of an entwined family tree there that has effect. I don't know that Dan Harmon has ever been credited as a rewriter, but he's done a lot of punch up on Marvel movies. Some of the Doctor Stranges, and I don't know that he ever was the final script, but he was in the process.
And Michael Waldron is the big writer that came out of the Community machine, right? Or the Rick and Morty machine. He was a Rick and Morty writer, I believe. So yeah, I wish them well, and I want them to do well. So I'm hoping, wouldn't it be awesome if and this is now like the umpteenth time in the past couple hours in recording that we've put a lot of our faith in Avengers Doomsday. We really could have mud on our face once that movie comes out, and then go back and listen to these episodes and be like, weren't we so naive? But wouldn't it be great if this were their comeback story, to be like, the MCU's back, the Russo brothers are back, and somehow it's not just hollow nostalgia for the MCU circa 10 years ago or whatever, right? So we'll see.
Well, and if I'm in their editing bay or I'm in their planning room thinking about this, I would pitch to them, do something formally interesting, because I think the problem here and in some of their other work is it's all just too generic. And if you are unique and specific, you can do something a little greater with that. So I think it comes back to, turns out you're a great teacher. The end. What a capper for the episode. The more you know.
Wow.
All right, good.
No, we're avoiding cliches, Greg. Don't undermine what we're trying to say.
Copyrighted material either.
Very true. Is that going to get us flagged on YouTube? We'll see. All right, Greg, thank you for being the only one willing. Although Antonio was I guess I could do that, I think. Or was that more about, that was about this.
He had a lot of very specific Stanley Tucci questions, I think.
Right.
But
sure.
we'll let him do the follow-up pod.
But yeah.
And Holly Hunter, who we didn't even mention, but she doesn't come out that often, right?
Wait, who is she in this movie?
She's one of the, right? Mrs. Incredible. I have the right actress name.
Oh, she's the...
Right? She's the
robot.
Cop,
she's one of
the heads of security for Stanley Tucci or something like that.
Oh, that's right.
But again, incredible. They got
she's barely in the movie.
Crazy, yeah. Who knows? She got cut out and they put Giancarlo Esposito in. Oh wait, that was the other movie we were talking about. All right. So Holly Hunter coming soon as Diamondback. Go ahead.
Wow. This is really why we can't record 2 episodes in one day, because there are too many referential jokes. Poor listeners. I'm really sorry. If you stuck with this long, I apologize. Okay, Greg, again, I was trying to thank you and you kept interrupting me. Thank you for being willing to review this movie with me. I think it is an interesting case study, especially in the context of Netflix and kind of sci-fi and these this type of movie. Where can people find you?
To your point, for better or worse, we're just going to get a lot more of these because it got the numbers. It keeps people flicking on the service, and it kept it. So every version of every kind of pale replacement for a genre is just going to keep getting made in that house forever. So yay movies. You can find me online at IonCanon, EYEONCANON, mostly on Letterboxd and Instagram these days. And I also will be joining at Rebel Base Card podcast for Andor coverage surprisingly soon after this episode drops. So prepare yourselves for some good, deep adult fun in Star Wars world. And you can, of course, follow the podcast everywhere we said before, but don't forget, especially on Letterboxd, to keep up with what we're reading and whatever weird project PT is up to late at night on the Criterion channel. It's worth tracking. I don't know that he's okay. Jen, where can people find you?
You can find me. I'm not going to add anything to that. That was perfect. You can find me on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Sobchakchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI. And you can find me on Letterboxd, logging far fewer films than both Greg doesn't give himself enough credit. He is also a weirdo and a sicko like PT and watching too many movies. The both of them outpace me unbelievably. So you can follow me on Letterboxd, but it won't be as exciting at Qui-Gon Jinn. And stay tuned we will be doing our hype draft at some point after this comes out. Hopefully soon. We gotta do it soon before the year's like half over.
And then it's basically summer movie season, and we hit the ground running. We might not see Antonio till fall, but we'll have a fun summer at the blockbuster movies.
Well, no, the Materialist is coming out. He'll come out for like the
That's true.
Yeah, he'll come back out for that.
True.
All right, thanks, Greg.
You're welcome.
I don't even know
Just hit stop while I'm
doing it. Thanks for listening. You can follow The Long Take Review on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free, and you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops. You'll also receive written reviews of new films with Oscar buzz, as well as any new installments of prop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.